June 6, 1944. A gray, wind-bitten morning in a narrow lane outside the village of Mesnil, somewhere between the high wheat fields and the shell-broken hedgerows of Normandy. The sky is a pale bruised blue. Sea spray still hangs in the air from the invasion beaches 2 miles away. Private Thomas Tommy Reed, age 22, wet wool collar turned against the wind, crouches behind a garden wall of stacked stones. The mud under his boots smells of burnt straw and diesel. He tastes metal in his mouth. A Sten gun rests across his forearm, the rough utilitarian silhouette of stamped steel and welded seams, its side-mounted magazine jutting like a stubborn badge. The weapon is light enough that he can hold it with one hand. The other clutches a crumpled photograph of his younger sister. He stares down the lane where a line of German positions should have been, but the positions are silent in the mist. Shellfire has muffled everything into a low, rolling throb. Farther off, a motorbike coughs. A church bell somewhere inland rings once. Uncertainly, Tommy's section leader, Corporal Edward Ned Hutchins, a broad-shouldered northerner with a half-inch crescent of silver, where a bullet nicked him at Salerno, leans in and whispers orders through clenched teeth. "Hold, wait for the green smoke." His breath puffs white. The Sten's metal is already cold in his palms. Ned is armed with a Sten too, a no-frills Mech 2 with its crude but deadly fidelity. Beside him, Lance Corporal James O'Connell checks the bolt with a practiced flick. Listens to the click, the reassuring clack of the open bolt mechanism snagging into place. The Sten smells faintly of oil and the sour, bright tang of fresh gunpowder. Across the lane, through a gap in a blown-out hedge, 2 German grenadiers in field gray lean against a sandbagged wall and laugh. One of them, an unteroffizier with a half-moon scar on his cheek, jabs a finger at the British lean-to and calls something in a guttural mockery. They have seen Stens before, the cheap British submachine guns handed out like candy to auxiliaries and resistance fighters in leaflets and shipments, and they sneer at the sight. Spielzeug, the Unteroffizier spits, and his companion makes a European shrug. Toy. The Germans call it Spielzeug. They joke it will break, they mimic the crack and say it sounds like someone popping a tin can. That mockery is a memory, not an academic point. Months earlier, in a battery room of a German barracks, an officer had mocked the Sten's stamped construction and side magazine. In field reports, the weapon was dismissed as a last-ditch implement for paratroops and irregulars, cheap, simple, unreliable. The Wehrmacht's chatterboxes and coffeehouse pundits had given it a nickname, the tin can, the rag and bolt. Tommy, who'd heard those reports back in England, remembers the smugness of photographers and the clipped tones of briefings, made in a hurry, not meant to last. Now hiding in a lane at dawn, the Sten is less a propaganda anecdote than a physical promise. Its simplicity, a bare tube, a fixed firing pin welded into an open bolt, a magazine that clips into the left side like the flap of a tin soldier's hat, means there are fewer things to jam in the muck. Its cartridge is the ubiquitous 9mm Parabellum, the same round used by German MP40s, so scavenging rounds from the battlefield is easier than with any exotic Allied rifle. The gun's designers, Shepard and Turpin at Enfield, had made a weapon that could be produced in industrial quantities, stamped parts, welded seams, no unnecessary polish. In a war measured in tonnage and factory hours, that mattered. The lane begins to vibrate. First, a distant rumble of tracked vehicles, then a closer staccato, someone calling out in clipped English, "Green smoke! Green smoke on the red tile!" A plucked string of nerves tightens in Tommy's throat. He squeezes the Sten's simple trigger with gloved fingers. The muzzle is a stub of pipe. The sights are a pair of notches barely more than a guideline. There is no glamour to it. There is only the readiness, the cold metal in hand, the knowledge that this little gun can fill a lot of space with a lot of lead. To their right, Captain Robert Langley, the platoon commander with a jaunty field cap and an expression that refuses to accept defeat, peeks over a doorway. His service pistol, a holstered Webley, feels cumbersome in the current world, an anachronism compared to the Sten slung across his men. He moves with the economy of a man who's trusted his lives to mass-produce tools before, helmets, rations, and these ugly little submachine guns. The men around him, privates and NCOs, eyes hooded against the spray and smoke, form an awkward but resolute line. The Sten's silhouette repeats like a family resemblance across the group. Blunt, utilitarian, almost laughably crude when compared to the polished MP40 or Browning SMG. Yet there is an air of expectancy that undercuts the Germans' disdain. Somewhere inland, artillery is zeroing. Somewhere above, transport planes are specking out white contrails where paratroopers have landed. The Allies have poured every resource they could spare into this morning, and the Sten, derided as a toy back in barracks and newspapers, rides that tide of iron and smoke. If the gun is a crude toy, it is a toy distributed by the pallet load. If it is unreliable in the hands of amateurs, it will be practiced, and there is practice in these men's fingers. They have been firing these guns for months in training in factory sheds and fields behind barracks. They know the sound of the Sten's bark and how to keep it feeding in mud and blood. Tommy breathes in and tastes the sea again, distant and salty. He glances at the under-officer across the lane who is still smirking, still sure he's watching a parade of tinkers. The laughter across the hedge is suddenly cut off by a new noise, the sharp, impatient bark of multiple submachine guns. The sound is not refined. It is insistent. A burst rips through the mist and the lane answers with a chorus of stamping boots. The first burst shreds the silence. A snarl of gunfire, dry and rattling, punches through the hedgerow like a hailstorm against tin. Reed barely flinches. His training takes over. He raises his Sten, sights half forgotten in the fog, and squeezes. The weapon chatters in his hands, the entire frame trembling like a live wire. The smell of burnt cordite fills the air instantly, thick and metallic. Brass casings spill into the mud like coins. The German under-officer jerks backward, struck mid-laugh, his field gray uniform crumpling as he topples against the sandbags. His comrade dives for cover, shouting, "Achtung! Maschinenpistolen!" But the British are already pushing forward, boots squelching in the wet soil. The Stens cough in short bursts, 2 seconds per sweep, each man firing in rhythm as if part of a single machine. To an outsider, the scene would look chaotic. Mud, shouting smoke, steel, but inside it, it's pure coordination. Hutchins signals with a raised fist, moves up with the second pair, and calls out over the gunfire, "Flank left." Reed, O'Connell, cover. They obey without hesitation. The simplicity of the Sten makes it easy. No safeties to fumble with, no heavy recoil to fight. It's just a tube that spits bullets. Point fire move, the Germans scramble. One fires back with an MP40. Its smoother, deeper rhythm cutting through the air. But the British guns are more numerous, their noise overlapping in jagged pulses. The lane becomes a corridor of echoing violence. Bullets chew through the hedges, kick up stone dust, splinter shutters. A wounded cry cuts through the haze. A helmet rolls into the open road, spinning once before it stops. Reed ducks behind a toppled cart. His hands tremble, but his weapon works flawlessly. Mud coats the receiver, rain seeps down the barrel, but the Sten doesn't care. He reloads, slaps the magazine free, jams another one home, pulls the cocking handle back until it locks with that familiar click. A sound that's equal parts crude and comforting. A few meters away, Captain Langley waves his platoon forward again. "Keep pressure. Don't let 'em regroup." His voice is hoarse, half drowned by the constant percussion of small arms. The British advance yard by yard, taking advantage of every crater and fence post. The Germans, who once mocked these toy guns, are now falling back from them. As Reed crosses the lane, something catches his eye. An MP40 lying in the mud beside its dead owner. Sleek, matte black with finely milled edges. A weapon that costs 5 times more to produce than the crude Sten in his hands. He hesitates, tempted for a second, then shakes his head. The Sten weighs less, reloads faster, and shoots just as well in close quarters. He presses on. By mid-morning, the village street is a charnel of twisted bikes, broken shutters, and the acrid stench of cordite. The first real sunlight breaks through the cloud cover, glinting off shell casings scattered across the cobblestones. The men of Langley's platoon fan out among the stone cottages, rifles and Stens sweeping doorways. "Clear," calls O'Connell, his voice cracking from exhaustion. They regroup at the crossroads, a signpost riddled with bullet holes pointing toward Caen. The quiet feels unnatural after the storm. Reed leans against a wall, his Sten dangling loosely in his grip. Hutchins claps him on the shoulder and grins, teeth white under a mask of grime. "Not bad for a toy, eh?" Reed manages a tired laugh. "Yeah, bloody fine toy." Behind them, the wounded are tended to, stretchers lining the edge of the lane. Medics move among the fallen, murmuring quick prayers or instructions. A captured German, pale and shell-shocked, sits by a hedge with his hands on his head. His eyes dart repeatedly to the British weapons, the unpainted steel, the rough welds, the exposed magazine. It's as if he's only now realizing what that ugly little gun can do when there are hundreds, thousands of them. As the company pushes inland, the rumor spreads quickly. The Stens worked. Across the beaches and bocage in towns with names no one back home could pronounce. These simple guns have begun to drown out the mockery. German radio reports begin referring to enemy automatic fire of unknown type, high volume. The Allies aren't winning because of elegance or expense, they're winning because of numbers, speed, and reliability. And nothing embodies that better than the weapon slung across every British chest that morning. By noon, the rain begins again, soft, gray, relentless. The men move on, and the mud claims the casings. The Sten, ugly as ever, remains their constant companion. And in the ruined fields of Normandy, the legend of the toy gun is rewritten in fire and smoke. 8 months earlier, September 1943. The rain over Birmingham is a different kind of gray, industrial, heavy, oily. The smell of machine oil and hot metal fills the Enfield Lock factory floor, where the Sten was born. It is not the kind of place where legends are forged out of pride, but out of necessity. The hum of lathes and stamping presses is deafening. Sparks fall like orange snow as sheets of cold steel are cut, punched, and pressed into rough tubes. There's no elegance here, no craftsman's touch like in the days of the Lee Enfield rifle. Just speed, efficiency, the work of war. Major Reginald Shepard and engineer Harold Turpin stand side by side, watching a fresh batch of receiver tubes roll down a conveyor line. Each one is marked with the faint letters, Sten, their initials and the place where it all began, Shepard, Turpin, Enfield. It's an acronym born not from marketing but from urgency. Looks crude, Turpin mutters, wiping sweat from his brow, but it'll fire. That's all that matters, Shepard replies, lighting a cigarette. If it can be stamped, welded, and issued faster than we lose men, it's done its job. The Sten is war-stripped bare of romance, where the Germans take pride in their precision-machined MP40s, each unit requiring hours of skilled labor. Britain no longer has that luxury. The Blitz has flattened factories. Resources are scarce. Every ounce of metal and manpower must be stretched thin. The government's directive is brutal and simple. Produce more guns, faster, cheaper, and so they do. In small workshops and bicycle plants across the country, in Sheffield, Nottingham, even London garages, the Sten takes shape. Its parts are so few and so crude that nearly any machinist can make them. The barrel, the tube, the bolt, the spring, 47 parts total, many of them made from repurposed tubing or scrap. Even its magazines are stamped by companies that once made lamp housings and prams. In one workshop, a woman named Agnes, who once built typewriters, welds the seam of a new Stenmach II. She hums as she works. Around her, hundreds of others do the same. Each weld, each rivet, each stamped serial number brings the weapon one step closer to the front. The Sten's simplicity makes it a democratic weapon. It doesn't belong to elite commandos or aristocratic officers. It belongs to everyone, the paratrooper, the partisan, the home guard volunteer. A weapon so simple that even the resistance can copy it. And they do. In occupied France, Polish forests, and Yugoslav hills, improvised versions of the Sten appear, local copies with crude barrels and unrefined welds, but deadly all the same. The Germans begin to recover them from ambush sites and safe houses. A field report from 1943 describes a high volume of automatic fire from poorly constructed English-type weapons. Poorly constructed? Maybe. But they work, and they multiply. By the end of 1943, over 2 million Stens have rolled out of British factories. At that scale, even the Wehrmacht begins to take notice. The MP40, for all its quality, can't be produced in those numbers. A new fear begins to whisper through German ranks, that the Allies have created a weapon that is not a gun, but an idea. A weapon that anyone can make, anywhere. Still, the mockery continues. In propaganda leaflets and barracks jokes, the Sten remains the toy gun. Cheap, clunky, unworthy of a professional soldier. But in London, in Birmingham, and across occupied Europe, the men and women who build them know the truth. That war isn't won by beauty or pride. It's won by what you can make in time. The Sten was Britain's industrial scream of defiance. a declaration that they would fight with whatever they had left, even if it was just stamped metal and resolve. When the first crates left Enfield for the coast, destined for the invasion that everyone knew was coming, the workers gathered in the rain to watch. No ceremony, no speeches, just a convoy of trucks carrying the ugliest weapon ever loved. They didn't know it then, but those crude guns would soon litter the fields and villages of Normandy, not as jokes but as instruments of liberation. Winter 1944, northern France. The air is frozen still, the kind that makes breath hang like fog and bullets seem to crack louder in the silence. Beneath the skeletal trees of the Ardennes, in a barn lit only by a single kerosene lamp, a group of French resistance fighters gather around a table. Spread out before them, 3 Sten guns, a handful of 9mm rounds, and the resolve of men and women who have spent years living like ghosts. Luc Morel, a wiry mechanic from Rouen turned maquisard, runs his fingers along the cold steel of one Sten's receiver. It's ugly, a dull gray tube with rough welds and a magazine jutting awkwardly from the side. But when he pulls back the bolt, the sound is like a promise. He smiles. "These English," he says softly, "they make a gun like they make their tea. Quick, simple, and hot enough to burn." Across the table, Claire Fontaine, a courier in a patched coat, loads a magazine with steady hands. Her father was executed by the Gestapo a year earlier. She hasn't smiled since, but when she snaps the magazine into the side of the weapon, there's a flash of satisfaction. Let's make it boil then. The Stens have arrived only days ago, dropped by parachute from a Royal Air Force Halifax under the cover of moonlight. Each crate came wrapped in burlap, stamped property of His Majesty's government. Inside were not just guns but lifelines, a means for the resistance to strike back. The Sten's genius is its simplicity. No gunsmith required, no delicate maintenance. Even in the mud, even with dirty hands and no oil, it will fire. And if it breaks, the Maquis can fix it. Weld a spring, file a bolt, replace a part with something scavenged from a farm engine. That night, Luc leads a raid on a German communications post near the village of Montbard. The small group moves like shadows, each armed with a Sten. There's no moon, only the glow of cigarettes behind enemy windows. The first guard doesn't even hear them coming. Luc fires from the hip. The Sten spits a burst. Pft, pft, pft. A crude, mechanical rhythm. The guard drops, his rifle clattering against the stones. Within seconds, the rest of the team fans out, spraying short bursts into the barracks. Chaos erupts. Shouts in German, boots thudding on wood, glass shattering. It's over in less than a minute. The radio post is wrecked, the cables severed. When the Germans return the next day, all they find are footprints and shell casings, and the telltale 9mm rounds from British submachine guns. Across occupied Europe, stories like this multiply. In Norway, partisans ambush a train with Sten smuggled in through Sweden. In Holland, resistance cells assassinate collaborators in city streets. In Poland, the Armia Krajowa builds their own Sten copies, the Błyskawica, the lightning. Each one a symbol of rebellion stamped in cold steel. The Germans start to take notice. Field reports describe untrained irregulars armed with British-made machine pistols. Captured officers are bewildered by the scale. Where do they come from? One major demands in a report from Dijon. How can such a crude thing be everywhere? Everywhere, that's the key. The Sten isn't just a weapon. It's an idea that spreads faster than any army. Its design leaks into occupied workshops, its blueprints traded through underground networks, its parts hidden in barrels of grain and under false floors. In one French town, a Gestapo officer displays a captured Sten at a public rally, mocking it as the work of fools. But in the crowd, a farmer named Jacques watches carefully. That night he sketches the gun from memory. 2 months later he builds one in his shed from bicycle tubing and a bed spring. The Sten has become a ghost, appearing in forests, in cities, in alleys and barns. A weapon for those who have nothing and everything to fight for. By the time D-Day arrives, the resistance has paved the way. Rail lines are cut, bridges sabotaged, German reinforcements delayed, and in nearly every ambush the harsh bark of the Sten echoes among the hedgerows and the stones. When the Allies finally land, many of those toys are already waiting for them, not in crates, but in the hands of free men and women who refuse to kneel. The Germans will remember that sound, the staccato voice of defiance, rough and unstoppable, long after the smoke clears. June 6, 1944, mid-afternoon. The beaches of Normandy are chaos incarnate. Smoke drifts inland from burning landing craft, and the air vibrates with the thunder of naval guns miles offshore. The sand is blackened, the water choked with debris, helmets, packs, rifles, bodies. Amid that apocalyptic roar, British and Canadian troops push forward into the bocage, carrying with them the weapon that no one expected to matter. The Sten Private Tommy Reed is still alive. Barely. His uniform is soaked, his hands blistered from crawling through barbed wire and sand. He's lost his pack, his helmet's dented, and his voice has been ground into a hoarse whisper. But his Sten? It's still there. Mud-caked, dented, scratched, but it fires. That's all that matters, Reed. Get up front! Hutchins shouts, waving him forward through a narrow hedgerow path. Ahead, a farmhouse converted into a German strong-point spits machine gun fire down the lane. The smell of smoke and fertilizer mixes with the stink of cordite. Reed dives into a crater beside Corporal O'Connell, whose face is streaked with grime. O'Connell grins with the weary confidence of a man who's lived 1 minute longer than he expected to. Still think it's a toy, Tommy? He yells over the gunfire. Reed laughs, breathless. Best bloody toy I've ever had. The Sten, for all its simplicity, is perfect for this moment, for these close-quarter fights where sightlines are measured in meters, not miles. Reed leans over the crater's lip, presses the gun tight against his shoulder, and sends a burst toward a window where muzzle flash dances. 3 rounds tear through the frame. Silence follows. Hutchins signals the assault. Up, move! The section surges forward, weaving between hedges, boots slapping mud. They break through a gap in the farm wall, tossing grenades through the open doorway. Explosions hammer the air. When the ringing in Reed's ears fades, he finds himself inside a kitchen turned into a bunker. Overturned table, blackened walls, shattered dishes. 2 Germans lie motionless by the stove. A third, wounded, raises his hands weakly. Langley enters, pistol drawn, scanning the corners. He nods once, satisfied. Clear it. Secure the ammo. We move in 5. O'Connell leans against a beam, panting, his Sten hanging from its sling. You ever notice how this thing never stops? Doesn't care about mud, rain, or how scared you are. Just keeps going. Hutchins gives a grim smile. Aye, like us. Outside, the sky begins to open up again. Rain falling in heavy, cold sheets. Across the hedgerows, the sound of gunfire comes from every direction. British paratroopers link up with the beach landings. Canadian units push inland. And the once confident German defenders are falling back. Bewildered by the sheer number of Allied weapons, they'd mocked the Sten as a plumber's nightmare. But now that nightmare is real. 1,000 tubes spitting fire through Normandy's hedgerows. At a crossroads near Ranville, a German officer crouches behind a truck, his hand clamped over a bleeding wound. Around him, his men shout, firing blindly into the hedges. The officer hears a sound he's come to dread. Not the deep thump of rifles, but the high, chattering cough of dozens of Stens firing in bursts. The sound echoes like a chorus, rough, uneven, relentless. It's not elegant, not precise, but it's everywhere. He realizes, with cold dread, that the British have built an army of guns that anyone can use. And everyone does. As the afternoon bleeds into evening, the rain turns the dirt roads to brown sludge. Langley's platoon finally halts to regroup beside a stone wall draped with ivy. They're exhausted, filthy, but alive. The Stens lie across their knees as they eat their cold rations, steam rising from their clothes. Langley looks down at his own weapon, a factory-stamped piece of metal that cost less than a soldier's boots, and shakes his head. You know, they'll write books about the tanks, the Spitfires, the landing craft, he says quietly. But this little bastard will be forgotten. Hutchins chuckles. Maybe, but it did the job, didn't it? Langley nods. Aye, it did. In the distance, artillery flashes light up the horizon, the slow, grinding thunder of a continent being taken back inch by inch. The Sten may not have won the war by itself, but in moments like this, in the mud, in the smoke, in the trembling hands of boys like Reed, it was the equalizer. The weapon that let ordinary men do extraordinary things. And as the night settles over Normandy, its rattle still echoes across the fields and was a crude, metallic anthem of victory forged not by perfection, but by necessity. Summer 1945, the war is over. Europe lies in ruins, the cities gutted, the fields silent. In the ruins of Berlin, Allied soldiers pick through the wreckage of the once mighty Reich. Crushed helmets, burned-out trucks, shattered rifles. Among the debris, they find something unexpected. Dozens of captured Sten guns. Some are British issue, some crude copies made by partisans, some rebuilt from scavenged steel and German parts. But all of them share the same simple anatomy: the tube, the bolt, the side magazine. A weapon so basic that even in the dying days of the Third Reich, German soldiers had turned to using their enemy's gun. Major Shepard reads a report in London that makes him pause. Recovered weapons. Sten type in use by SS and Volkssturm units marked Beutewaffe, captured weapon. He sets down the paper, exhales a slow, ironic laugh. The toy had become their tool. From the hills of Normandy to the alleys of Warsaw, the Sten had reshaped the rhythm of war. It was not beautiful, not elegant, not even particularly accurate, but it was everywhere. Its presence turned scattered resistance groups into armies, and ordinary civilians into soldiers. In Warsaw, survivors of the 1944 uprising recall the sound, that uneven clatter of the Sten echoing through the burning streets. It wasn't the roar of a tank or the shriek of an aircraft. It was smaller, more intimate. A defiant voice in the dark. For the men who carried it, the Sten wasn't just a weapon, it was a companion. Reed kept his until the end of the war. He brought it home to Manchester, wrapped in a canvas bag tucked away in the attic. Years later, his grandson would find it, pitted with rust, the serial number worn nearly smooth, and wonder how something so crude had once carried so much weight. But for the men who faced it, the German, soldiers who once sneered at its shape, the Sten was a ghost that haunted them from the beaches to the forests. In their diaries and captured letters, the word Stenfeuer appears again and again, not out of respect but out of fear. It was the sound of ambushes, of unseen enemies firing from hedges and shadows, the sound that meant the enemy was closer than you thought. Historians would later call it the gun that armed the free world. Others would call it the people's submachine gun. But for those who lived it, those who fought with it or against it, it was something simpler, a symbol of how desperation breeds innovation, and how simplicity can be more terrifying than perfection. At Enfield Lock, the old factory gates are rusting now, the war long over, but a few of the workers who built those guns still gather at the pub down the street. Agnes, older now, hands arthritic but proud, laughs when she hears young men call the Sten ugly. Ugly? She says, setting her glass down with a soft thud. It was ugly, love. But it worked. And that's what mattered. The Sten went on to serve in dozens of conflicts after the war. Korea, Malaya, Palestine, even the early Cold War. Its design inspired generations of cheap, efficient submachine guns, each one echoing the same philosophy. Make it simple. Make it work. Make it everywhere. But its true legacy lies not in blueprints or museums, but in memory, in the stories of men like Reed, Hutchins and O'Connell, and the countless others who held that cold, unpolished tube and found courage in its rattle. In Normandy, the hedgerows have grown back thick and green. The lanes where Reed once fought are quiet now, the air filled with the sound of bees instead of bullets. But if you listen closely, on certain windy days, the countryside still seems to hum with something faint, a ghost of metal and defiance, a whisper from the past, the whisper of a gun that was once mocked, and then feared. The Sten, the toy that filled the streets of Normandy.